Since Netscape launched its Navigator web browser some 20 years ago, the way we communicate and share ideas has undergone the most profound change since Johannes Gutenberg declared that with these 26 soldiers of lead, I shall conquer the world. That was almost 600 years ago. Internet technology has spawned e-commerce, email, smart devices, social media, online video, online gaming, and online news. Even our watches, cars, refrigerators, and televisions have gone online, and human behavior is changing as a result. Is graphic design, in the traditional sense, dying, or perhaps even already dead? 20 years ago, graphic designers had a clearly defined role, limited mediums to master, and a broad influence over the way we consumed information and the environment around us. In so many ways, technology has disrupted the analog and intuitive nature of graphic design, and in doing so has delivered more opportunities than ever for us to create, build, and plan for an unlimited number of mediums and situations. The questions we have to ask ourselves, therefore, are what are the best ways to blend creative, timeless creative skills with the need to be utterly fluent in a digital environment? An environment that's disrupting everything we thought we knew. And what role will designers play in a world where technology is evolving so rapidly, it's almost impossible to predict what opportunities will exist in the future? And so it is in this context, and because technology is allowing us to ask questions we never thought of before, I confess I have no idea where we're going to end up with our panel session today. What I do know, however, is we have an amazing group of people here who are up for the challenge. Our first speaker, who's over here from the States for this and another event straight after this, Mark Pullyblank. Mark spent much of the 90s working as a musician, bouncing around North America in a tour van. He began his animation career animating talking animals on the first Garfield movie. He has been an animation supervisor at Rainmaker Digital and Frantic Films, a senior animator at Sony Imageworks, and has worked in various departments at Weta Digital. Some of the films he's worked on include Smurfs, Avatar, The Adventures of Tintin, 2 Hobbit movies, Journey to the Center of the Earth, Watchmen, Bolden, Night at the Museum, 2 Garfield movies, Blades of Glory, Case 39, Vantage Point, and Electra. He's been busy. Mark is the co-founder and CEO of Thea Interactive. He's also the animation department head of CG Spectrum, which is a specialist, high-profile animation school, and is currently working at California State University in Chico, California. Mark also undertakes freelance and consulting work at film and game studios and has kindly agreed to be our keynote speaker today. Mark.
I love to draw. Truth be told, I'm not even very good at it. But I don't care, because the actual feel of pen or pencil on paper is something that I cherish over and above the result. And I think, it's going to be distracting now, and I think we all start that way. If you give a box of crayons to a group of toddlers, other than the few geniuses that eat them, most, if not all, will happily scribble away, completely oblivious to the fact that they aren't any good at it. Because they simply love what I love, which is the process. I did work on some of those films. And then around the age of 7 or 8, we start to become critical of our work. We judge it. Other people judge it. The process begins to take a back seat to the result. And at this crucial time, a lot of us become intimidated, frustrated, and we quit. And we've even developed this narrative, this false narrative, that states that artistic endeavors are reserved for those lucky few who were born talented. Right? We've probably all said that ourselves. We know people who say it. I just wasn't born with any talent. Artistic creativity is something you either have or you don't have. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't those that are born talented. Certainly they are. But I'm just here to say natural ability is not the only game in town. Now, I'm an animator, as Simon said. I've worked at, well, he took all my best bits. I've had the pleasure to work on some super, super great films with some really, really talented people. And I think why that's interesting is because growing up a talentless, chubby farm kid on a remote farm in Western Canada, I really had no right or reason to believe that I could someday work alongside some of these creative giants. And I think about my mother. She said to me one time, when I was still quite young, she said, "You seem like a person who thinks you have something to say, clearly." And she said, "You seem like you're constantly looking for a way to say it." And I think that's true. But I don't think that's unique. I think that sort of speaks to all of us, actually. I think we're all happiest when we're able to express ourselves, and express ourselves creatively. I think we feel very, very good about that. So for me, my parents were those encouraging type of parents. And when I was 9 years old, they plucked me off the farm and they enrolled me in music lessons, specifically guitar lessons. And it was for all the best intentions, but it was an absolute fucking disaster. My teacher was a brute of a man. And to be fair, it was the 70s. I think smacking kids around was in the handbook, page 4 of what to expect and you're expecting. The 1970s edition, I think, was smack your kid around a little bit. But I remember one of the last times, I think maybe the last time I went to see him, he became so frustrated with my progress, or lack thereof, that he hit me across the head so hard, I was knocked over my chair and onto the floor. And I remember laying on the floor with the chair wrapped around my legs, looking up at this man still screaming at me. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe I just wasn't born with any talent. You either have it or you don't. And I clearly do not. And funny enough, that's exactly what he told my parents. Your son has no talent. I was 9. Like somehow my ability to learn music was wrapped up with my, how well I could take a punch, which would make for a really interesting season of Australian Idol, or whatever it is we watch here. And who is he to decide? Why does he get to decide? His biggest musical achievement is slapping kids around in his basement. There wasn't even really any rhythm to it. They were like these weird, off-time jazz smacks. Smack, smack, smack. I guess maybe that made it easier to make contact. But anyways, that's what I was told. You don't have any talent, don't worry about it. Lots of people don't have any talent, don't feel bad. But I did feel bad. I felt really, really bad. So later, when I was 18, I picked it back up again. And this time, I was careful. I wanted to learn this thing on my own terms. I wanted to square this circle. I didn't buy it, that I just didn't have the ability to pick this thing up. I didn't have any teachers this time, at least not any formal ones. And it turns out that my old guitar teacher was absolutely right. I didn't have any talent. I was terrible at it. But I didn't care, because I liked to do it. I liked the fact that I got better at it. I found this very obvious equation that if I did it a little bit, I got a little bit better. If I did it a lot, I didn't get a lot better. I got a little bit better, a little bit faster. And strangely enough, after a few years of really diving into this thing and just really, really loving the process of playing this thing, I found myself in the company of some extremely talented people. We got signed to a major record label out of New York City. We were on the road making records. We had the number 6 album on the charts in Canada, which is I sold 10 copies to my mom. It's still Canada. But there I was, a professional musician, charting musician. And once again, sorry, not once again, for the first time this time, I found myself in the company of people who truly excelled at what they did. These weren't people who were born gifted. These were people who simply loved what I loved, which is the process. After a few years of living on the road, I had a couple of itches I wanted to scratch. I wanted to start a family, and I didn't want to do it in a tour bus, which is ironic because the act of starting a family is one of the favorite pastimes of a tour bus. So I hear. And I wanted to get back to drawing, but more specifically, I wanted to see my drawings move. So I cashed in my chips, and I enrolled at the ripe old age of 33 years old. I enrolled in an animation school. And once again, it was a disaster. I was really, really, really bad at it. It was devastating, actually. For months and months and months, the only feedback that I got from my efforts, my significant efforts, was that I was really, really bad at something that I really thought I'd be good at. Something that I wanted to be good at and something that I needed to be good at. I was receiving so much negative feedback that I found it difficult to pick up my pencil. A blank sheet of paper, something that has been my best friend my whole life, suddenly filled me with anxiety. This time the stakes were high, my shortcomings were amplified. Suddenly the result was all that mattered, and for the first time in my life, I hated drawing. And then something kind of curious happened. Sorry, is this a portrait? Because if that's a portrait, something curious happened. I was working on an assignment, on an animation assignment one night, and I felt good about it. I was enjoying it. I felt like I was finally starting to get it, and so I packed it all up and I handed it in to my instructors, and 2 days later they handed it back with a big C- written across the front of it. The deadly grade. And I had this sort of epiphany. I looked at this C- and I thought to myself, this thing doesn't give me any information at all on how to get better at this. All this does is reaffirm what I already knew, and that's that I suck at this. But aside from that, nothing. And that's kind of what grades do, you know. I think grades at best can be encouraging. Most commonly, they're distracting and confusing, and at worst, they're discouraging. So I approached my instructors and I said, if you wouldn't mind, please don't grade me anymore. And they said, we have to grade you. It's the law of the land. And I said, okay, let's make a deal. I don't want to see it. And they agreed. And suddenly the result took a back seat, and I could concentrate on the process. And I relaxed. I got better, progressively better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And sure enough, a few months later, I graduated, and I landed a job on a film. My very first job at a school was on a feature film. That wasn't a great film. I wasn't going to tell you that I worked on Garfield. But there I was. Again, I had no right to be there, but I'm working on a film. And once again, I was surrounded by people who really excelled at what they did. Once again, I saw the old system of those who do it the most, do it the best. And once again, I was in the company of people who simply loved what I loved, which is the process. There's a theme here, I think. So, now on top of everything else, as Simon mentioned, I also teach. I teach animation to university students, to online students, to anyone who will listen, really. And students come to me for all sorts of different reasons. Some of them come to see me because they really liked Finding Nemo or World of Warcraft. Some come to see me because they don't know what they want to do with their lives, but this seems cool. I always talk about animation having sort of a cloak of glory to it, and it is a cloak. And few of them come to me because they think they have something to say, and they've chosen this as the way they want to say it. But all of them sit down in front of a computer, they open the software, and it's gray. It looks like math. It doesn't look anything like Finding Nemo or World of Warcraft. And as their shoulders slump to the floor and the color drains from their faces, I realize after everything I've learned and everything I've been through, that my job, my only job as a teacher, is to simply peddle enthusiasm for the process. Not to punish you for not getting it right, but to show you not only what I love, but why I love it. To help you over that hump. For some of us, it's 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. For me, it's been years. Over that hump where the only feedback you get from your efforts is that you're truly bad at something you truly wish you were good at. If I can buy you some victories, if I can introduce to you some part of the process that you get hooked on, then you'll want to do it more. If you want to do it more, you'll get better at it. If you get better at it, you'll want to do it more. If you do it more, you get it. Listen, careers in the arts seem like a long shot. At least that's what everybody told me. People told me it's a long shot. They told me you'll never feed your family. They told me to grow up. I heard all this kind of stuff. It can be very, very daunting, and it's true, unless your work is compelling. If people are compelled to look at your work, then you can do anything you want. That's the ticket. And compelling work starts and ends with the intimate relationship that we have with our craft. Isn't it? It's an honesty that we've built out of years and years of frustration that could only be sustained by our love for the process. That is the authenticity that causes people to pause and to pay attention. So, this is what I want to ask you now. What would you do if you didn't care about the result? If you no longer cared about the result? We all have a thing. We have a sketchbook that we bought that's in our bookshelf that we always thought we'd start sketching with, but it's too painful to see the result. We have a notebook that we're going to start writing a story in. We had an idea. Maybe it's a musical instrument collecting dust in your closet. I say, dust it off. Not to be good at it, because you won't be, but silence that voice that tells you it's a waste of time. If you're not good at it, it's not worth doing. And instead, channel that child who doesn't care what it looks like, who doesn't care what it sounds like, but who only cares what it feels like. I say, just for a moment, one day, maybe every day, throw the result in the back seat and give the process the respect it deserves. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. If the key message is to care about what it feels like, that felt like a really nice talk, so thank you. Now, I need to introduce our moderator. We're now going to have our panel session. Many of you will know Jess Gully. More of you will know of Jess Gully. We'll all know her within the next 45 minutes. Jess Gully is named one of Sydney's most 100 influential people. She's curator, festival director, and media producer who uses creativity in the arts to engage communities with each other and with the public realm, and to spark dialogue about the tomorrows that are being built every day. Jess has been the festival director of Vivid Ideas for the past 6 years, is one of the creators of TEDx Sydney, and the instigator of Kids Hack Day Sydney. Excuse me. She's the City of Sydney's public art consultant for the Green Square Library and Plaza, a member of the Barangaroo Art and Culture Panel, and a member of the Advisory Committee for Objects Australian Centre for Design. 2010, Jess served as policy advisor to the New South Wales Minister of the Arts, and prior to this, directed the Qantas Spirit of Youth Awards for 5 years. In 2009, she edited Creative Cities East Asia for the British Council, a project to document creative urbanism across the region. She maintains a connection to media by presenting Soho Right Now, a weekly arts and culture radio show on 2SER. Jess.
Thanks, Simon, and thank you, Mark, for that really inspirational talk. We have a lot to talk about. It's a pretty provocative topic, the idea of digital design being at the crossroads. And I'd love to invite Mark Pullybank back up to the stage to join our panel. And we have a few other special guests joining us this morning as well. So could I call on down Tim Kotsikias? Tim Kay, everyone. Tim Kay, who's the Executive Director of Reactive. Have a seat. I've also got Prue Jones, who's the Creative Director of DT. Prue. James Noble, who's the MD and Creative Director of Carter Digital. And Nick Gower, who's the co-founder and digital strategist for Mentally Friendly. Have a seat. Anyone? Unfortunately, Michael Armstrong can't join us. Oh, and David! David Trorn. Sorry, David. Totally forgotten. So, wow, I was just a bit emotional then, so that's why I was a little bit forgetful there. Sorry, David. David is the Director of DT and also a key member of Tractor Design School as well. Are you the CEO of Tractor Design School?
Chairman, I think.
Chairman. They're all good titles, so.
The boss.
The boss. Wow, so there was so much there. What I'd like to do, though, is to turn to our audience and find out who you guys are. How many people here are students? Just raise your hands. And students in design. Yeah? How many people here are practicing designers? Okay, wow. That explains the glasses. Okay, and how many people here are kind of digital strategists, digital people, agency people? Okay, wow, lots as well.
And how many people were just looking for the bathroom?
Okay, and so what we're interested in here, I guess, and following on from what Mark was talking about, is this an evolution or a revolution in design that we're experiencing at the moment? And also, what is that connection on that trajectory that we've all been on and that many of you are still on, from school and from studying through to practice, and also the idea that your career and the industry changes many, many times over the course of your life, if you're lucky. But I wanted to go back to something that Mark was talking about and talk about design. So Mark, you talked about that amazing feeling of putting pen to paper and honouring the process and stripping the process back to its simplest form. You know, as designers, do you need to cultivate very different skills to design with pen, with paper, for print, for physical environments, as opposed to designing for what is becoming the dominant medium now, which is screen-based work? Does anyone have an opinion about that? Is it the same design fundamentals that you have to employ when you're doing it by hand as opposed to doing it with the grey boxes that Mark was describing? David?
I suppose my view would be the feeling that you're talking about is the same feeling, you know, whether and that extends beyond design too. I mean, even if you're coding and, you know, when you're creating, that feeling of the process is the feeling of the process. But I think separate to that, I think the skills you need to succeed in a commercial role are definitely, you know, quite different in the digital environment. You need to have a broader skill set.
Yeah, I think I'm bringing it up early, but I think it's the empathy. If you can feel the empathy, it doesn't matter what medium that you're executing it. It's still, it's the main reason that I do what I do. I want to try and engage with the person that it's meant for and intended for, and use that to create whatever it ends up to be. And it can be any medium. It doesn't matter. It's visual. It's audio. It can be anything at all. And I think that's what we all try and do to some degree. If you can get that right, then that's what makes you end up creating really good product or content or ideas.
I'll have a crack at my answer. Would probably be sort of similar. You know, like I actually was sitting in the front listening to you, Mark, going, "Yeah, hell yeah, that's why I'm doing this." But I think in addition to that, I'd sort of almost break it down to a few different types of work that we do. Digitally is sort of fundamentally a lot harder and a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive. So, you know, one of the great benefits of just being able to sketch out an idea is that you can sort of test it really early and see if it sucks, you know, because you don't want to kind of make something in Photoshop or whatever and think it's going to be great and then go through a lengthy process of actually building it and then only to find out later on that it actually, you know, wasn't even a product that anyone wanted to use, and furthermore that it was a really crappy product to use. So I think having those skills of being able to flesh out something and communicate an idea very, very quickly and very, very easily is of huge benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think most of what we do, perhaps not as like a junior designer, I guess, but as in creative direction, in strategy and in user experience design, is paper-based anyway. It's like verbally communicated and directed. And obviously where the skill set does need to increase is your knowledge of what's possible and the implementation processes. That's really, really important, and your passion for those things. You can't, in the same way that I guess the sort of traditional old definition of designer would have been passionate mainly about paper and printing and know how those two things come together and know processes. We need to be aware of like a massive variety of potential implementations. That's probably like the biggest difference in skills. The actual using of Photoshop or Sketch or whatever is like a really small percentage. Those programs are designed to be used by anyone, really.
See if I can get this out of my brain. I was just thinking, we used to design and we know how to do the process, and you need to learn how to do the process in different ways because it's evolving so quickly and we're all learning it. It's not like if you kind of come up with an idea, you need to put it down on paper and you need to know what the process is to get that idea out of here and into whatever medium it needs to be, and you need to learn those skills that you know that there's prototyping or you know that there's Photoshop to be able to create it in the first place, and then you may know what you want to do, but if you don't know how to use Photoshop, you can't create it. I used to happen all the time with me when I was first trying to do this before, because I was a graphic designer to start with in the late 90s. I'm starting to show my age. And I wanted to do retouching on photos, but I didn't know how to do it. I could see people had done it, but there's no way of getting from what I wanted to do and how to actually implement it. So you kind of learn, that's what's happening so quickly now, is that constantly, like now the iWatch is coming out in a couple of months, and I've got to learn how to interact and use that medium to create, and how to create the process to do that. So it's constantly changing, especially I imagine with, I always wanted to work in what you do. I was like,
Careful what you wish for.
yeah, till I realised how much you have to learn.
I just like to weigh in and say I think it's important to remember that they're all tools, right? Just because you have the flashiest hammer on the, carpentry set doesn't mean you know how to hit a nail with it. And I think these are all tools that we use to communicate ideas and to communicate feelings to people. And I think it's somewhat, I don't want to say ironic, but I think it's significant that, we're still, although this is a technology festival, today I was communicating ideas with my voice alongside Sarah, who's communicating ideas with a paintbrush. Do you know what I mean? Like there's no computers, the computer actually broke. It just didn't work, but we're still able to communicate. So I think it's important to realize that they're all just tools, and the way we use those tools, and like I think you were saying earlier, it all feels the same way, regardless of what tool we use.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here. I think before we even get to kind of the tools that we use, obviously one of the most important things, and it doesn't even have anything to do with technology, is as you mentioned before, empathy. I think we all really need to get our BA in human behaviour, if you like, observing people, seeing understanding what problems people have and how we solve them. And of course, that's the first step in the creative process, is to have that empathy, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, so that you can really devise a solution to the problem that fits perfectly.
That's a really good point, Prue. So I think, we're talking about some of those fundamentals. I'll come to you in a minute, Tim. So we're talking about some of those fundamentals. And while the tools and the technology have changed, And they've changed dramatically, I guess, over the past 10 or 20 years. What are the fundamentals from when you studied or when you trained as designers that you've carried through? What that you learnt back then using probably Quark or something like that, that you use then, do you actually still apply every day?
Yeah, Simon asked me this exact same question just before we walked in. He was actually my headmaster at Billy Blue, and he's asked if anything that they taught us we still use, and almost kind of like sarcastically, like obviously not. But in actual fact, I think that almost everything we actually learned during those years at Billy Blue are used every single day in terms of, as I say, empathy, communication, comprehension, the idea of design thinking and trying to communicate problems, but also solve problems and communicate things visually. I mean, that's exactly what we're doing every single day. And if you can do that, then it's just the tools that you do it with that change.
Okay, I'm just going to pause for a moment and say, bye, Mark. He's got to go and do another talk right now, so you can go and listen to him after this. Not now, after this. Yes, see. Okay, but that was a really great answer. Thank you, Nick. It's true. It is about communication. It's about empathy. It's, as Prue said, it's about understanding the problem and being in the real world and not just in an office. Tim?
Oh, I just wanted to, Prue, I'm really glad you said that, because that really rings true for me. I mean, with this whole, when you're in a digital studio and you're, my background is being in a big digital studio, and shit gets complicated really, really quickly. You'll be in a meeting with a dozen people and you've got strategy and content and search and technology, and you're kind of frantically trying to put together this elaborate sort of response, and everyone's sort of coming at you from different angles, and we've got to do this and this and this and this and this. Sometimes it's actually easy to forget, well, what the hell is the problem we're just trying to solve here? Like, what are we actually trying to do? And I think that one thing is the thing that I was taught at university. I'm looking at you, Dave, because we went to the same university. But I think, yeah, of course, all the you can teach all the design principles, and you can choose the right type and learn about that and grid and all the rest of it. And that'll sort of get you some of the way as a designer. But the number one thing is just sort of taking a step back and kind of going, what am I actually contributing here? What am I doing here? What problem am I trying to solve? And I think that's sort of what I got from Swinburne and critical thinking and all those sort of art history classes.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with all of that. I think the empathy and just, I mean, any creative process is really about using your intuition, which I think is a really complex form of rational thought that you can't even explain, to come up with ideas. And then to use your rational brain to think about which of the 5 ideas you've come up with is the best one to move forward with, and then come up with new ideas. And that process of going along an evolving idea, is a fundamental part of any design process, whether it's music or anything else. There's some fundamental design skills that we would have all learnt back at design school around typography and colour theory and scale tension and dynamics and all that sort of stuff, which I still think about today, even though I don't actually work as a designer. I think jumping from here, I think one of the things that's very different in the digital environment is being able to be really agile and to be able to jump into an area that requires new skills where there's no kind of manual. And it's a little bit different today, but I think when, 20 years ago when Prue and myself and Tim went to design school, there was no book on how to code HTML. There was no course. There was none of that, and I think
the internet.
Exactly, there was barely the internet. And some people, I think probably like most of us here, jumped onto something new where there was no safety net and no instruction manual, and then, as Mark sort of said, spent the time and enjoyed the process of trying to learn that new thing, and then became proficient with it. And that gave us a real edge over other creatives that might have, in some cases, better, fundamental creative skills, but they just can't work in that new environment because they haven't been able to teach themselves, the new game. And obviously in this digital environment, things are changing every single year. So what you learnt last year becomes out of date next year, and you've just got to have that sort of pioneering mentality to keep looking for new things that you can apply to your problems that you're trying to solve.
You'll see quite often now that there's, in our industry, there's always the perspectives of 2015 or 2016. There's always this list of what everyone thinks is going to happen and how things are going to change and evolve, and it's because it's all guesswork. None of us actually know what is going to happen next. We can all speculate, but until us as people decide what we like and what we don't like. We're not sure which direction we need to take yet. Like, will Google dominate, or will Apple dominate, or which phone is going to be the best phone to start targeting for? We've got to try and cover all those mediums, and there's a constant evolution. And with colour theory, like we were saying about when we went to university, colour theory was a really strong part of what I learned, and then realised once the internet arrived in its full swing that colours mean different things in different countries, and you've got to start to think outside of this box and stop using your colour theory to get a feeling across, and start using the actual design principles around it to make it mean the same thing to everyone. And that was one of the biggest things I started to realise, that I can't use bright red and orange and brown and all these different colours in the way that I feel towards them. I feel that makes me angry, that makes me happy, that makes me sad. It's different around the world. Once we started making websites that were reaching everyone, so it was quite a big change. And I used to buy colour theory books when I started doing digital about print, and then used to realise that the change of colours look different on different screens, and print it looks different again. And there's no Pantone. It's that constant change is what you've got to try and adapt to and keep across.
Can I just add to that, James?
No.
I think.
Thanks, Tim. That was great.
I think, honestly, I actually think we're going through a fairly. I don't know. I've always sort of had this sort of tension in my mind that I was a sort of a graphic designer, and I sort of, fell in, well, thanks to Dave, largely got into this sort of digital thing fairly early on. And so I've never felt like I was in one box or the other. In fact, I always felt like I was a bit of a black sheep. But the reason why I'm telling you this is because I used to always look at design work of the people that came before me, and I guess I'm talking about Sagrove and, that sort of, Mimo Costolino, and all that sort of era. And I used to look at this stuff and kind of look at it with wide eyes and kind of go, how did they make those decisions? They're really irrational decisions, and they're just really spirited and risky. And if you think of the best pieces of graphic design work, it's sort of controversial and challenging, and it sparks a whole bunch of different parts of your brain, and it really sort of gets you excited. And then fast forward to this time where we're kind of, even I'm hearing us talk about the way we design, and it's rational, and it's based on a grid, and it's based on best practice and usability, and you can almost learn it from a book. And that's almost at the point where we are now, where if you look back at all the sort of the recent digital design history, it went from maybe 10 years ago, it all being about Flash. Okay, Flash, not so cool, but if you look at the sort of spirit of the design work that was being done 10 years ago, and then you sort of look at all the rational stuff that's going on at the moment, it just makes me feel a little bit disappointed in a way, because we are losing a bit of that spirit. And I think that's something that all of us around here need to go into these big rational sort of situations and kind of go, well, where is the human spirit in this work, and how do we do something that people remember that will look different from every other website that you see on the awards website? And
I suppose that's the challenge of in this digital environment, we're creating products that people need to be able to use them. They might have to be able to give somebody CPR because of this app we've made or whatever. And it's a really refreshing thing to be able to work on something that is just purely a piece of communication that's supposed to be emotive, and this brings up, I suppose, the whole UX versus...
Okay, whoa.
Yeah.
Not there yet, guys.
Okay.
Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about UX in a minute. But I want to go back to the main theme, and you have highlighted a really great point earlier, James, the idea that we used to rely on tools like colour theory and the assumption that we were talking to people with a similar sort of cultural understanding or perspective, but that is absolutely not the case when you're designing for a global audience. And this is one of the things that brings me back to this theme of digital design being at a crossroads. So what is this crossroads? What is the biggest challenge? My question for you is, what are the biggest challenges or disruptions that you see in your industry and that you come up against every day, not kind of far off ones? And are you seeing these as radical shifts away from any idea of what design was before, or is it a natural evolution? Is it something that you're prepared to kind of take on? Or do you need radically new skills? What do you think, David?
Look, I think you do need you need a different attitude to be successful. It's not that you need different creative skills, but again, you need a bit of that pioneering spirit, I believe. I think I can't even count the number of times people have said to me, wow, everything's changing so quickly, don't you feel nervous about what's going to happen next year and you're going to be left behind? And how do you keep up with it all? And I don't think anyone here would ever feel nervous about that because, I think it's all built into our DNA that something new comes along and you work it out and then before you know it, you're somewhat an expert in it pretty quickly. And the one of the great things about a really rapidly changing environment is that you never, it's not that hard to be an expert. You're only ever going to be 12 months behind somebody else, which is not that long. So I think you really do need that in this kind of digital environment. I do believe you need that sort of ability to just be able to, and that comes from passion and loving the process of learning and what Mark was talking about, to be able to dive into a new technology. I think you need to be comfortable with technology as well, whatever that means. Technology is going to mean different things in different environments. So from what I've seen from the people that I went to university with 20 years ago and how different careers have all evolved, I think there's certainly a bit of a technology haves and have-nots, and the people that sort of feel comfortable with technology can just extend their creativity into further kind of reaches of what you can do. Besides all of that, I think one of the critical things that I think leads to success in your career is the ability to just be able to sell your ideas, and that's sort of a fundamental thing. If you can't communicate and sell your ideas, then it's very hard to get very far at all. You can have the best ideas in the world, if you can't communicate them to somebody, then they'll just be dead in the water.
Which is a continuing thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a continuing thing. Exactly. Yeah.
Let's talk about these disruptions. I don't need a microphone.
Disruptions. Well, I was actually going to comment on what David was saying, and I kind of believe that in design you kind of start out as a bit of a specialist, and it's kind of a cyclical thing. You might be interested in a particular part of design and focus on that when you're a student and coming into the industry. Maybe it's graphic design versus digital design. There's a kind of field of design that you're interested in. But I think design, as I was saying, is cyclical and it's evolving. So you start off as a specialist, and I think at the moment we've really kind of entered the era of the generalist, and designers are expected to know so much, and it's ever increasing, and at times can, quite honestly to me anyway, feel a little bit overwhelming. I'm not nervous about it.
We call them unicorns in our office. Like, can we find a unicorn? Can we find a UX design unicorn that can do front end, back end?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's the argument. Can we?
Unicorns in the audience here.
I'm hiring now.
There's one.
There's a difficult point. You start to specialise and start to branch out, and because it's in a... Sorry, I've interrupted you.
Oh, no, that's fine. We can have a conversation. But I think there's definitely there will be a time when design is so fragmented across so many different specialisations as technology evolves, that there will be a time, I believe, where we all need to become specialists in a way again, and then we'll become generalists again. So I really feel like it's a cycle. Is that deep?
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't want to interrupt there. But my response to this, which is slightly different to what you guys are saying, is I think, if you think about the graphic design history, it's actually fairly new, and I think, it's littered with a whole bunch of stories about designers really having to work hard to demonstrate the value of design as a business tool. And I think now more than ever, like a lot of the work at the enterprise level where you're actually affecting real business change and you're, really having to communicate that. I think as a creative person, it's so much more than doing something that looks good or that's even usable. I mean, there's a whole new context to what we're being asked to do as digital designers, which is around how a business transforms a complete digital customer experience by way of multiple touch points and many different channels and lots of different sort of digital products. And I think to actually genuinely sort of contribute business value, I think that there does need to be a understanding of how valuable we can be and how different we think to business people, and how valuable it is for us to actually go into a business and say, whoa, have you even thought about your customer? Do you think that would be a good user experience? And really kind of attacking it from a much broader bird's eye view.
I think just coming back to Jess's question as well, because I'm sitting here just thinking, because I'm just thinking about it's that analogy that you put the frog in the hot water and it doesn't realise the water's hot until it's kind of boiled to death because the water's, we've been through such an incredible change in the last 20 years, it's just not funny, and I think a lot of what we've been talking about up until now is really about those fundamental creative skills, which are really timeless. And if you go back to the Renaissance or any other period in history, those same creative skills would have been there. And there are always going to be a percentage of the community who are creative people who can solve those problems, and whether they're, I often say that if Leonardo da Vinci was around today, he'd probably be a UX developer. He'd probably be making films as well. He'd be doing all sorts of stuff, But the point is that in the last 20 years, there's just been this incredible change in society because of technology, and now we all spend many hours a day looking at lots of different screens, and on those screens we can actually do things. We can make things happen. We can talk to anybody anywhere in the world. We can control devices and cars and do all sorts of stuff. And so I think if you, like when you look back on an art movement in art history, if you look back on this period 100 years from now, it'll just be such an incredible time, and there is so much change going on that we probably don't even acknowledge. And so, I think this is, in that sense, there is a bit of a revolution going on, and no one really knows all the answers. And I think part of that's what we're talking about as well. It's so fluid, and unless you've got that ability to be able to be really agile and adapt, every month, quarter, year, you can get left behind very easily.
I think it's also, it's exciting. You said earlier about people thinking you're scared about being left behind. I'm actually excited by it because we've got more opportunity and more mediums that we can express ourselves or our clients or an idea, and you can touch and interact with people directly. You're not just your business or your the client or whoever it is that's trying to say something is not just projecting it at people anymore. They're actually receiving information, and you'll get more emotive conversation online rather than. Sorry, am I jumping the gun? We're starting to engage and interact with the people directly rather than just saying, do this, buy that, this is what this is. It's like, so what would you like? How can we help? It's more of and you can start to be more precise and more helpful, I suppose.
It's definitely, thank you. It's definitely more of a conversation. And we'd like to have a conversation with you as well. So if you have any questions, please make your way down to one of these two microphones, and we'll come to you after this question, which we've been building up to, basically. So Prue talked about the idea that there's a cycle at work where you become a specialist, then a generalist, then a specialist. And at the moment, the kind of buzzword that everyone cares about and that everyone's talking about is UX. Now, isn't UX just good design? Am I missing something here? What's the difference between UX and design?
Well, okay, here's a really good example. Let's think about Google Glass for a minute. Is everyone familiar with that piece of technology? Okay, so there's a piece of design and a piece of, it's actually a piece of UX that failed miserably because, it actually wasn't, if you think about it, it wasn't actually solving a problem. There was no actual need for it. The idea of it might have made things more convenient, not have to pull out a smartphone to take a picture or whatever. But I think that really wasn't thought through very well, because what it actually did was created problems for users. There were people getting beaten up in bars in America because other people sitting in the bar were convinced that they were being filmed. There is that right there is just not understanding human psychology in design and how things should work. If you're not actually solving a problem, design for its own sake, and indeed technology for its own sake, is fairly useless.
I think with the glasses, the Google glasses, that was a good example of marketing. When you've got an unlimited budget, you can produce Google glasses knowing it's going to fail, but get everyone talking about it. Then it's a disruption. You're creating something that people start talking about. Go on, Tim.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think what troubles me a little bit about sort of making the distinction between design and UX is that if you're saying that if you're saying that UX is fundamentally about thinking about the user, which I wholeheartedly believe, then what is design? And then that conversation ends in, well, design is about sort of colouring in, kind of wireframes basically. And I think there's a whole lot of context to this, and it's sort of thinking of the analogy. It's the difference between designing a shed and designing the Sydney Opera House. The shed, you could make a beautiful shed, sure, and you could have an architect and an engineer and someone who sources materials, and you might end up spending $400,000 on a shed. But a lot of those specific roles aren't that sort of necessary. But it's a question of scale, and I think when you get into those sort of bigger projects, there are a lot of sort of splintering, because just the amount of man hours and the due diligence that needs to go into that sort of process ultimately does require people with specific skills. And you find yourself with a team of people who have research skills and different sort of backgrounds, where they can really contribute a whole bunch of stuff that will make that project incrementally sort of better, but they're not always useful, and sometimes it's sort of over-engineered.
I'm going to jump in here quickly. I think when we talk about UX too, there's two different things. There's the idea of, which is where it really came from, the idea of user-centered design and creating an experience with the user in mind. And when I started designing websites 20 years ago, I was thinking about that then. There's a guy, Tim probably remembers Nathan Shedroff, a guy who inspired me, wrote a book called Experience Design back in the 90s. And we used to think about that in the early days of DT. We'd always think about, okay, someone's coming to this website, what experience do we want them to have? And how can we make it a great experience, taking into account a whole lot of factors, the time it takes for a page to load, a big issue when we had a 9,000 baud modem, and 640 by 480 resolution screens and all that sort of stuff. So the experience was frustrating for everybody on the internet. So it was a big thing to really think about that experience. And I think any designer, whether you're a UX person or not, you're thinking about the end user. Now I think the terminology of UX really relates to, it relates more in the industry from what I can see to a process which involves research. And the distinction is, well, if it involves research and the design decisions are being informed by research, then it's UX. And if it doesn't, then it's not UX, which is, there's a bit of confusion around terminology and things going on. Now, I think one of the big issues in the industry right now, and I've experienced this talking to people in at DT, is that there's a bit of conflict going on between the UX people and the designers, because both are thinking about the end user and both have the ability to create an incredible experience. So it kind of becomes art versus science, research versus intuition. And sometimes art should win, and sometimes the research should win. And a very, very quick story. I mean, the DT guys have been working on a new website for probably the last 10 years. And I was in there recently, sorry, Pro. I was in there recently, and there was a whole lot of screens printed out up on the wall. And this is the new website. And I'm being taken through the new website by our UX director.
It's changed, by the way.
I know. And they're talking through the process and the research. We did this and we did that. And there was something down the end, and I thought, I just like that. That just looks awesome. Can we just do that? And the UX guy said, we don't want to talk about that. One of the designers just went and did that on his own, and it sort of was a real reminder to me of we've got to be really careful. We put a lot of value on research-driven UX to help solve problems, which is incredibly valuable and valid, but we've got to be careful that we don't drown out just pure art for art's sake and the power that can have to create a great experience as well.
I think that's what exactly your point. Sometimes the research can only take you so far, and sometimes you have to go with your gut, or you have to just think, if Da Vinci was doing a painting and he did it by committee, then would it look the same? Absolutely not. But sometimes when you come up with a creative design, you come up with an idea, if you've got that UX thinking in mind when you're doing it, which is what you're saying, some of the designers, you think you know it, UX think they know that it's an informed decision, that they've had some research. We're doing a project now where we've done all this research and we're coming up with these ideas, and once we start to do it, it's too practical. It's not the voice of the client, it's being too linear, and that's where we have to go, well, we've got the baseline grid from the UX, from the research and from the information architecture of the base of what we want to do and how to achieve it, and then we have to put some more feeling into it and start to go with how will people feel, how will they react, rather than just being, it's the home button, so it says home on it, like it's very dry and boring. That's what it is, but you don't need to do that. You can start to change it and evolve it and sort of mesh the two together, the user experience design, and the information architecture, the research, you mix that with the designers as well, with the visual designers, that you tell them what feeling you're trying to get into it, and then mix the two together to create the perfect team of people thinking of the same problems and how to solve it in different ways to come up with the right end solution. Because you're my worst nightmare if you say, I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're sort of talking about the difference between sort of utility and branded experience here a little bit as well, and depending on the project, there's a different degree of emphasis on sort of research and. But the other story that kind of I'm reminded of is the Herman Miller Aeron chair, which is the one that doesn't have sort of any upholstery, and they took that to a user group early on and said, "Oh, what do you think?" And they all went, "Oh, look, it looks like it looks okay in progress. Let us know when it's upholstered, and we'll give you our final opinion." And the guys at Herman Miller just went, "Oh, fuck it, we'll just do it anyway." And now it's in nearly every office and in the Museum of Modern Art and all the rest of it. So I find, the interesting little grey bit there where you are sort of solving very usable and utility-driven sort of solutions, but in a sort of an artistic sort of expression-heavy sort of way is sort of where I find the most sort of interesting things happening.
I agree. I think it depends where the stakes are, how important the object that you're building is and what it's going to be used for. If you're building a website for your own company, like you're not building a rocket ship, obviously. Like no one's going to die. You're not going to lose money necessarily. There's no transactions taking place, I guess is what I'm getting at. And there's probably a greater emphasis on brand, I suppose. Whereas if you're doing a booking system, then obviously focus groups and research becomes more important. I think UX is good design. To answer your question, I think that it should be design-led or led by designers. I think that it should always be informed by research, regardless of the stakes. And I think that we should train designers to understand, and also project managers and the wider team to understand when and where the stakes are the highest, and when and where things need to be tested. Because focus grouping colours for websites is absurd. But running people through things and finding issues that are stopping like critical conversions, or stopping people from being able to call the numbers they need to get to, and those sorts of things is more important. But I still think that should be design-led.
I think that's a perfect point. It's not one size fits all. If it's a utility and someone needs to be able to actually go through a process and buy a ticket, like you say, it's mainly about the utility and making sure that that's usable. And maybe 10% of it is how do we want people to feel while they go through it as well. And there's going to be a lot of other situations where it's 90% about how do we want people to feel and 10% utility. So it really comes down to what you're creating.
Yeah, I think the UX process is highly democratizing. So, you've got your visual designers on one end and your strong research-driven UX guys on the other end. But yeah, it levels the playing field, and then it's testing that allows you to see what it is that's successful. And testing, yeah. Absolutely. Without testing, we're lost.
Okay, so I see now why everyone's so passionate about UX. This is a thing. Just to update you on what's going on Twitter, everyone is there are a lot of claims that there are unicorns in this audience. There's more than one unicorn in this audience. So I want to talk about the unicorns for a minute. I also love to get any questions from the audience. If anyone's got a question, you can tweet it using Pause Pure, or you can come down to, or Ask Tractor, I think is the other one.
Don't be shy.
Come down and ask us a question. They're all very nice. Yes. We'll just make sure that microphone's on down here on the right. Yeah.
Test.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Xavier Ho from University of Sydney. So talking about UX and also human-centered design, we often, as a designer, we look at user needs, we do research, then we come up with a problem definition, then we find a solution to that problem. But there's always a designer's view on what a human need is, and there's also the user's view on what their human needs is. And there obviously needs to be communication. And because designers often reframe their problems, we also change how we view the problems over time. So their communication needs to be established, but sometimes that communication can be difficult. So how do you find and how do you approach this communication in both on stage, in both establishing sort of what you are doing in collaboration with the needs of the user?
My sort of response to that question would be that, it sort of depends on what camp you sit. One camp is that you do all your research and let the audience sort of tell you what you want. The other sort of lean camp is that you get sort of a bit of a feel of what the user wants, and then you just build something and then sort of validate it. And I'm firmly in that camp. So I think you're absolutely 100% right that there are all these sort of layers of interpretation, and you're sort of counting on people's interpreting it correctly. But none of that matters once you've got a prototype in front of a customer, ultimately, and that for me is sort of where it's at, and I think that's sort of almost what we're all saying, regardless of whether the outcome is that you want someone to feel a particular way about a brand, or you want someone to complete a tax form. It's really all the talk and research, and that all falls by the wayside when you've actually got a result in the sobering moments of looking at a user testing sort of report. That's, I think, where there's nowhere to hide really at that point.
I think some of it's when I'm thinking about things in which direction to take, it's down to it's from the old ad agencies. Where is it a waterfall effect, or is it an agile approach? Like, which way are you going to go to get to your answer? Microsoft went with Windows and slowly died by committee, whereas Steve Jobs told them what he wanted, and that was what he decided that the audience wanted too. And he was very adamant about how his legacy was going to be left behind, and so they were very different camps, but they both worked. One because Microsoft because that was the only medium at the time that people could use, and Apple wasn't really it was a fledgling business, and then the other one was because he was focusing more on the visual of it rather than the application of it. And so that you can take both approaches, and this just depends on what project it is. It depends on how strong your will is sometimes, and sometimes you've got to be dictated to by the user, and make refinements once they've tested it and once they've tried it, and you'll start to see that things you'll evolve and become exactly what they want. But sometimes if you can give them a baseline, this is where we think it is. Can we reiterate and change it? That will slowly change it and to become the right answer one way or another. In a very long-winded way of answering the question.
Not at all. Could we take the question over here, please?
Hey, how you going? So if Leonardo da Vinci was alive today, what kind of design firm do you think he would run? Would he be more research-driven or kind of more intuitive?
Innovation lab for sure.
This is your fault, Dave.
What kind of process?
I should let you know that is going nuts on Twitter.
I take responsibility for this. Well, he's just the ultimate polymath. He did a bit of everything, so he would have been. I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about. I don't know enough about his history to know whether he would have been working in a large firm with 200 employees, or whether he'd be kind of running around working independently with a few people following around helping him out. I'm not too sure, but I think he would have. I just have always thought of him as being that perfect person who's got the left brain, right brain, rational, creative thing going on, which is no more relevant. It's no less relevant now than it was in the Renaissance. But I don't know. I don't know enough about his history to know.
I'd say he's the Steve Jobs of his time.
No, I reckon he's more like the Elon Musk.
What a cool guy though. He's designing weapons, but very commercial as well though. I think that's the other thing. I mean, he was being, paid by Medici family and the church and so forth. And he was designing military equipment, he was painting, he was doing sculpture, architecture.
Designing the first airplane.
The whole bit, yeah, and anatomy, absolutely everything. And just someone who's just incredibly passionate, obviously, about the world around us and very observant.
Okay, I am going to take this question, but first I think that's a good point to talk about unicorns. So you mentioned the unicorn over here, you guys. You were talking about someone who can do a bit of everything, who's a generalist, but a really a deep generalist, I guess. What have you got in mind? What is that perfect combination of skills, you think, for digital design today?
I think David has said it perfectly about the left brain, right brain. They're the hardest people to find that can think in two different ways and see things from two different perspectives when they're coming up with an idea. And sometimes you've got to restrain yourself as a designer because you have all these great ideas, but then you've got to pare it back and think about what problem am I trying to solve, not what do I think is cool for the moment. And I've got this time, I've got this budget, what can I do within that time to make it the best possible it can be? And the unicorn, which is what we refer to, is someone that can, because it's in our industry, it's slowly becoming segregated and not segregated, separate specific skill sets. Like you were a web designer, then you were a UX designer, and then the word UX became quite popular and prevalent, and everyone started putting it at the front of their title without actually being fully understanding what it meant. That's now changed into service designers, interaction designers, information architects, UX researchers, and the unicorn is kind of someone that has a small snippet of all of it that can kind of, my agency is nowhere near as big as DT. You can have people that are specialists in their fields, whereas in my world, I need people that can multitask and come across different parts of the project at different points in time. So that's where the unicorn comes in.
I think from my point of view, diversity is one of the most important things, like diversity in a team, and I just think that's incredibly important. If you think back to the early days of film, the one person could write the film, direct the film, act in the film, shoot the film. It's pretty hard to do that these days. It happens, but it's pretty hard to do that these days, and I think the same can be said for what we're doing. You need, big projects need a lot of specialists, but you also need the general. I like to call generals because I think generalists sort of...
Sounds cool.
But it sort of undermines it a little bit, where really, if you think about it, an army, the general knows what the archers do and the infantry does, and
they may not be able to do it themselves, but they
know what they do. And you need to be able to know what all these things, what all these different roles play in order to be able to coordinate them. So I think they're both equally incredibly important, and that's one of the things we've always celebrated within DT is celebrated specialists, but celebrated the idea of opposing points of view in the one project, and respectful debate. So it's not like I'm right, you're wrong, I know this, you don't know that. It's very much different points of view, different people from different backgrounds in different specialist roles, and hopefully you mix all that up and out comes a great product at the other end.
I think that passion's a big thing with anyone. If you're passionate about what you do and you love what you do, then you're going to strive to do better each time, and that's a really big thing. If you can get someone that can think and have a conversation with someone, then you're wrong, I'm right, that doesn't work. But if you can say, well, you're passionate about your problem, I'm passionate about mine, how do we bring it together to make the perfect solution for people?
Back to Leonardo. Sorry, guys. There's this idea called the Medici principle, which is the Medici family used to bring together a chemist and a scientist and an artist and an engineer and say, "Can you guys fix this problem for me?" And I think that's just a really great analogy for kind of a way to solve a great sort of digital problem as well.
I think the funniest thing about this whole Da Vinci metaphor is that, didn't he, with his clients, he'd sort of turn up and go, "Oh, look, I'm going to have a think about it and come back in a couple of weeks' time and I'll let you know." And all his clients used to get really shitty with him, but he'd be saying, "Man, I'm always working, I'm always thinking about your job. But just because I'm not actually on site doing that fresco doesn't mean I'm not working." So I'm trying to imagine managing Da Vinci in a studio going, "Fuck, where is that guy? Is he late again?"
Can we take the question over here, please?
I'm curious, you speak a lot about the end user, but there seems to be a mysterious group of start users and middle users. I'm just wondering, who exactly are they, and do they need to be there in the design process?
just for my sake, do you want to just explain what you mean by start users and middle users?
Yeah, it seems like you care a lot about being empathetic towards the end users, and yet there seems to be some sort of settling in process before you get there, or some sort of distillation process between other forces before you can actually design for them. And I'm wondering, are those start and middle users, whoever they are, getting in the way of you actually just designing what you need to do?
So the end user being the audience, the market, the people out there in the world.
And you're a designer.
Thinking the middle users, the start users are often clients. Is that kind of the problem, or people within agencies? What do you think?
I have a crack at this. I think what you're saying really acknowledges the fact that processes aren't perfect. In that we can come up with a model and a structure to try and do what we think is going to be right to get us a result that we want. But it's not perfect, because the process of having a user session is still very different to what happens in the real world at the end. So. The process is probably a little bit flawed.
Yeah, that process comes to the fore when you're delivering an MVP, like a minimum viable product. Then yes, you do have start users in that sense, in that it goes out and then you observe people using it and get feedback, and you iterate and redesign and redeploy, and so there are in that sense potentially start and middle and end users.
Yeah, it's like that sort of saying, right, where I'm going to balls this up, but the sort of idea that if as soon as you observe something, you sort of change the outcome. I mean, you guys might know who made that quote, and I think that's at the heart of what you're saying. And I think there is a lot of work in the UX field around doing ethnographic studying and sort of really getting into someone's home and going, hey, so, how do you, complete your tax bill or whatever? And we'll just have 100 cameras watching you do that, and that doesn't feel weird at all, does it? So I think that's a really valid point that fundamentally, actually, you're kidding yourself if you think that a real test is actually getting people to come in and test a prototype for you. But it's probably better than not doing it, which is what we used to do, which was just, man, we're going to do this, they're going to love it, and then find out that they didn't like it. And the MVP thing's a really good example as well, which is really basically this principle of doing something that just focuses on the least amount possible. I prefer a minimum lovable product, which is what the guys from Thirst talked about at a thing recently. But I do think that the quickest you can get to the people who are ultimately using the product, the better. And then from that point, iterating and making sure that you're not factoring the process to finish the moment something goes live. And that's something that we're all sort of trying to get our head around as well, particularly when you're talking about more of a product that is more of an app. Oh, is that someone taking a stretch or someone asking a question? Sorry to point you out there.
So I'm just on acronym watch. So you said MVP. You meant not most valued player, but minimum viable product. And
yeah.
But it's not. But what you want is minimum lovable product.
Yeah, I mean,
this is. Well.
I can't claim that I invented that term, but the guys from Thirst did. But the distinction that they were making, and which I quite like, is that you can, if you design a car, you can say that the minimum thing the car needs to do is get someone from A to B, and you can kind of go, well, you need 3 wheels or whatever, but really the driving experience is better with 4 wheels, and I think it's just a good sort of, that's a terrible analogy, but the kind of concept is that not to forget that people do need to fall in love with an interface and that's the emotional part of someone's connection with technology is really important, and it's not just about whether or not you can tick all the boxes of the sort of requirements and really use that to test whether or not that product will ultimately be successful.
Now, I really do want to take these questions over here, but we've run out of time. And so I think that emotional point is a good point to leave on. Just to comment on what's going on online, everyone's really passionate about this idea about empathy. The BA in empathy was doing really well. There's a lot of talk about Leonardo. There's a lot of talk about unicorns. It's interesting on there. We've done our job here. Thanks to the panel. Thank you. And I'd just like to welcome Simon Pemberton back to say a few words.
I worry about the Da Vinci thing. He wrote backwards. He's going to be stuffed using a QWERTY keyboard. I mean, he's going to have to rethink how he goes. I was listening to an ABC radio program, some of you may have heard it, a few weeks ago now. There's a headmaster from a high school in rural New South Wales who just won a scholarship, a 6-month scholarship to Harvard Business School because of all the innovations he had introduced to his high school, and there were some extraordinary things that he had done, including things like no class times, no timetables. It was kind of really out there stuff, but it was really working. Gave me lots of food for thought, of course, as a head of school, but one of the things that kind of stuck in my mind, and it won't go away, and I think it has some context here, he was talking about a 13-year-old girl in one of their computer labs who had spent, and she was allowed to because they had no timetables, but she had spent the whole day designing and building a website, and she was encouraged to stay there for as long as she needed to get this done. And that really kind of woke me up, because if a 13-year-old is designing and building, I'd love to know, I never will, but what was design and what was build going through her mind. But also in terms of a school, and we run full-time industry-based programs, I'll come back to that in a second. When she rocks up, hopefully, for an interview to come into Tractor in 5 years' time, I really worry about what I'm going to teach her. If she just spent she already knows how to build and design a website, what the hell is she going to want to do when she rocks up in 5 years' time? And we have to try and be ready for that. We as an industry, certainly we as a school, because we're working with industry. And we have actually, we concentrate hard on that. All these guys are involved in Tractor in one way or another, and several of you in the audience are. So I think it's kind of really useful for us, and I bet she's not thinking about UX or any of these other things. So maybe there really is a paradigm shift, and maybe it really is just around the corner. But I think by having these conversations is giving us the best chance of trying to stay in touch. Or maybe we should all go and sit in a high school for a day and just see what's going on, see what's around the corner. That might be good too. I want to thank, obviously, Mark for his talk. He's somewhere around here right now giving a talk for CG Spectrum, which is one of our sister schools. He's talking about the animation program and the special effects program. I imagine it's really cool. He's certainly, obviously, a good presenter. I'd like to thank Jess for holding all of this together and keeping the Twitter stuff going. It's a brilliant job. Thank you, Jess. And obviously our panel. I'd like to thank David, Nick, James, Prue, and Tim for supporting what we're trying to do. As Tractor, we always have had, and hopefully always will have, extraordinary industry support. But I just want to close by thanking you, because without all of you guys sitting there, we would just be talking to ourselves, and well, that would be fun. It wouldn't have been quite as interesting. Thank you all so much for coming along. Thank you.